Witnesses vanish. Hunters are left with nothing but broken gear, and the truth is buried by those who refuse to believe. In the remote corners of the wilderness, something ancient and terrifying stirs. From a quiet RV park to remote corners of dark woods, these chilling encounters with a shadowy creature leave behind only fear, confusion, and unanswered questions. What is lurking in the darkness? You won't want to miss these unsettling tales. The RV park sat deep in southern Oregon, outside Grants Pass. It was a quiet, forest-lined place, usually home to retirees and road-weary travelers. On April the 22nd, 2025, it became something else entirely. That night, something came out of the woods, something massive, something wild. It left 2 people dead and dozens traumatized. One girl, 16-year-old Kayla Mendez, survived by hiding in the park's concrete restroom. Her testimony was all authorities had to go on, because the thing that came through the RV park wasn't supposed to exist. That day had started normal. Families grilled hot dogs while retirees sat by their trailers, sharing stories and watching the sunset bleed through the tall pines. Kayla had come with her aunt and uncle from Redding, staying in a borrowed Class C motorhome. She had wandered off just before midnight to brush her teeth at the park's shared facilities. That small detour saved her life. What followed next came fast. At 12:17 a.m., the park's main power shut off. The sudden loss of light woke several guests, and some stepped outside their RVs to check their breakers. In the dark, a deep, crunching sound echoed through the trees. Heavy footsteps, too steady and too strong for any known animal, shook the ground. Then came the first scream, a man's voice torn open mid-shout. It was sharp and short, and followed by metal twisting and crashing. Kayla huddled inside the restroom, frozen. Outside, the sound of splintering wood and ripping aluminum filled the air. A trailer just 30 feet from her was being torn into like it was made of paper. There were more screams, a woman this time, and something bellowed back, a deep, guttural roar that rattled her chest through the wall. It wasn't a bear. Bears didn't scream like that. Bears didn't walk on 2 legs. Bears didn't shove their fists through steel. Outside, Jerry and Linda Hopkins, a couple in their late 50s, had rushed from their motorhome when they heard the power fail. They never made it back. Their trailer was found the next morning crushed inward, both victims inside, broken, torn, and bloody. The roof had been peeled back like a can lid. Deep claw gouges ran down the sidewalls, spaced too far apart to be a bear's. Investigators marked it as a probable black bear attack, though privately, responders admitted the damage looked unreal. Kayla stayed hidden for nearly 20 minutes, clutching the toilet paper dispenser in the pitch dark while something circled the building. It didn't try to come in. It didn't need to. It was enough to know it was there. Heavy footfalls, slow breathing, and the occasional growl kept her silent. When the noise finally stopped, she waited 10 more minutes before crawling out. Her legs shook so bad she could barely run. Across the RV park, chaos had unfolded. 2 trailers destroyed, a third half crushed with claw marks across the windows. Campers were missing shoes, bags, even pets. Someone had left blood trails from the main entrance to the center lawn. An elderly man had suffered a heart attack trying to flee. Others abandoned their RVs completely, leaving them behind as they jumped into cars and drove without headlights. The first authorities on the scene were Josephine County deputies. By dawn, Oregon Fish and Wildlife had arrived. They chalked up the incident to a large, aggressive bear, possibly rabid. They mentioned spring food scarcity and unusual animal behavior due to early heat. No one believed them. Not really, not after seeing the prints. Kayla, still in shock, pointed them to where she thought it had stood. There, under the tree canopy near the bathrooms, were 5 deep footprints, each one nearly 20 inches long, pressed into the soil nearly 2 inches deep. No claw marks at the toes, no paw shapes. These weren't bear tracks. They were human-shaped, but huge. Officers took pictures, then said nothing more about them. No plaster casts were made. The next day, the area was bulldozed for cleanup. The entire park was closed for repair and investigation. By the end of the week, most of the trailers were towed or destroyed. Some campers were offered hush money, relocation assistance, they called it. Word spread online. People speculated. Cryptid forms lit up, but with no photos, no video, and no confirmed statements, interest faded. The incident was filed away. The Hopkins deaths were officially ruled a tragic but natural wildlife attack. Their daughter tried to push for further investigation, but no one listened. Kayla moved back home. She didn't talk much after that. When asked, she said it wasn't a bear, and it wasn't a man. It was something in between, something taller than the doorframe, covered in black hair, with glowing eyes that seemed to stare right through her. She only saw it through the window slits in the door, backlit by the stars and firelight from the burning trailers. Investigators noted the strength required to crush a motorhome. They acknowledged that no known bear could do that, yet the conclusion remained the same. They said it had been a rare and isolated event, an unusually strong animal in distress, they called it. But some in the area had heard stories before, about screams in the forest, about missing hunters, about tracks that went nowhere. One local, a retired firefighter who helped at the scene, later told a friend it wasn't the first time he'd seen something like this. He claimed authorities always blamed bears, but he knew better. He knew that bears don't knock over trailers. To this day, the RV park remains closed to the public. The land is privately owned now, with fencing and no trespassing signs circling the property. No charges were filed. No photos were ever released. Only one survivor spoke out, and even she eventually stopped. No one really knows what came out of the woods that night, but it left its mark in twisted steel, torn flesh, and the shaking breath of a teenager who still wakes up screaming. Derek Lawson and Brian Yates were lifelong friends from Spokane, both 32 years old, experienced hikers, and frequent visitors to the wilderness around their city. On March 9, 2025, they set off on a planned 3-day trip into the northeast sector of the park, far from the tourist trails, but they never returned. Park rangers found their vehicle parked at the trailhead 4 days later, untouched, keys still inside. Search and rescue teams combed the area, but snowfall and high winds made the job nearly impossible. For nearly 2 weeks, there was nothing. No signal, no gear, no prints. Then, just after the thaw, a hunter found Derek's remains in a shallow gully, half covered by brush, surrounded by broken trees and strange tracks. What happened to the two men was never fully explained. The official report blamed a mountain lion, but the wounds didn't match. Neither did the crushed bones, the missing limbs, or the massive footprints near the scene. Some say the truth was buried to avoid panic. Others believe something far worse walks the forests of Rainier. Derek and Brian had logged dozens of backcountry trips. That morning, they packed light, snowshoes, emergency supplies, dehydrated food. They were heading toward a seldom-used trail known for elk sightings and frozen waterfalls. The route was remote, with no cell service, no shelters, and only faint trail markings. But the two men thrived in isolation. They were prepared. Weather conditions shifted faster than expected. Temperatures dropped, and winds picked up. Sometime during the second night, something went wrong. Based on GPS data recovered from Derek's fitness watch, both men had returned to their camp just after dusk. The next data ping happened 3 hours later, half a mile downslope, moving erratically, then stopping completely. The search party found Brian's gear scattered across the slope, some of it shredded. His backpack was torn in two, and his hunting knife was found snapped in half under a moss-covered rock. His body was never recovered. Derek's corpse was another matter. Found in early April, his body was a mess of trauma. Forensics said his ribs were crushed inward, spine snapped cleanly in two. His face was untouched, eyes wide, lips split from screaming. Deep gashes ran across his chest and thighs, but they weren't clean. They were blunt, wide, and appeared to be made by massive fingers or claws. His arms had been broken at the elbows. One of his boots was still on, the other 50 feet away, hanging from a tree branch 15 feet off the ground. Tracks were found near the scene, not boot prints, bare footprints, four-toed, nearly 20 inches long, sunk into the mud nearly 3 inches deep. Too deep to be human, too defined to be a bear. They circled the body and vanished into the dense pine forest. Rangers photographed them, but never released the images. A volunteer rescue worker later admitted they were covered up by the following day. the prints filled in with shovel marks. The case was officially closed in early May. The cause of death was listed as blunt force trauma consistent with a large predator attack. Authorities claimed a mountain lion likely attacked the men while they slept. They refused to address the missing gear, the broken trees, or the barefoot tracks. Locals were less convinced. Hunters in the area had spoken for years about strange sightings, huge shapes between the trees, noises that didn't belong. One man, who asked not to be named, claimed to have seen something dragging a deer carcass by one arm near the same trail where the hikers vanished. Another woman said her cabin was pounded on by something with hands just a week before the search began. The final theory from the authorities was vague. A rare and unfortunate encounter with a disturbed animal, possibly a bear or lion, they said in the press release. But no bears were active in the region that early in the season, and the bite patterns didn't match any known species. Forensics raised more questions. Derek's wounds weren't clawed or bitten in typical ways. They appeared crushed, like something gripped him with hands too large to belong to a person. There were also bruises in the shape of long fingers across his shoulders. His backpack was found miles away, ripped open from the center like paper. The GPS unit inside had recorded a sudden sprint, over 30 yards in less than 4 seconds. Then it went dark. No photos were ever recovered from their phones. Both devices were missing when the bodies were found. Some speculated they were taken. Others said they may have tried to use them for light or defense. Either way, no video or images of the attack exist. Only the scene left behind, and the evidence investigators would not explain. The Park Service denied rumors of an internal report labeling the case as a cryptid incident. Still, whispers spread. Among search and rescue teams, the story became a quiet warning. Hikers were advised to leave the trail before it got dark and always watch their back. Derek's parents refused to accept the official cause. They hired a private investigator who visited the scene weeks later. He reported finding twisted saplings, broken limbs, and stripped bark, all at chest height, far above a bear's reach. He found no wildlife scat, no predator signs, nothing, just silence, heavy and suffocating. The park eventually closed the trail where Derek and Brian disappeared. Officially, it was due to unstable terrain and wildlife risk. Unofficially, rangers stopped going in at night. Helicopters now patrol from above, instead of sending foot patrols into that section. Brian's body has still never been found. To this day, what happened to those men remains a mystery. Something powerful stalked them in the dark, something that left no trace except fear, shattered bodies, and stories too strange to tell out loud. The Collier family had owned their off-grid cabin in the Californian wilderness for over 20 years. It sat on 5 acres of dense forest, 2 hours from the nearest town. It was a quiet, peaceful retreat until March 2nd, 2025. That weekend, something came out of the woods. Something large, silent, and full of rage. By the time it was over, the cabin was in ruins. The family escaped, but barely. They refused to return. Authorities dismissed it as a wild animal disturbance, but the damage, the sounds, and the eyes seen watching from the tree line told a different story, one the family would never forget. Darren Collier was a 43-year-old construction foreman. His wife, Mia, 39, worked as a veterinary assistant. Their 2 children, Lily, age 9, and Tyler, age 13, had been coming to the cabin since they were toddlers. It had no electricity, no cell signal, and no neighbors. Just old wood, propane lanterns, and silence. The family arrived Friday afternoon, hoping for a relaxing weekend in the mountains. Everything seemed normal at first. They unpacked gear, started a fire, and cooked dinner. The first sign that something was off came that night. Around 2 a.m., Tyler heard heavy footsteps circling the cabin. He told his dad in the morning, but Darren thought it was just a deer. Still, they found a trail of disturbed leaves and pine needles around the perimeter. Oddly, there were no hoof prints, only long, bare impressions spaced too far apart to be human. The second night, things escalated. The family sat by the fire after dinner, listening to the wind. Then came the knock. One single, sharp thud on the back wall of the cabin. Darren grabbed his flashlight and ran outside. Nothing, just shadows and trees. But the knocking came again 10 minutes later. this time from the roof. Panic started to build. They heard something move across the roof. Slow, deliberate, heavy. Not a raccoon or squirrel. Something that shifted weight like a person. Darren rushed out again with his rifle, circling the cabin, heart pounding. Still nothing. The third knock came from the front door. Not a scratch, not a push. A knock, like a fist. That's when Mia gathered the kids into the corner and locked the door with shaking hands. Darren bolted the windows. The knocking stopped. The forest outside went dead silent. No insects, no wind, just stillness. Then came the growl, low and long. It vibrated through the cabin floorboards. It wasn't a mountain lion. It wasn't a bear. It was deep, rumbling, and too large to belong to anything they knew. The family sat in complete silence, too afraid to speak or move. The growl rose in volume. Then something hit the cabin full force. The wall shook. Dust fell from the ceiling. Tyler screamed. The lights flickered as the propane lantern tipped over. Darren lunged to catch it before it shattered, but the second impact threw him off balance. This time, the cabin's front window exploded inward, glass and wood flying as something dark and massive shoved its arm through. Lily was pulled back just in time. She said she saw fingers, long black fingers, human-shaped but far too large, covered in thick, dirty hair. They gripped the edge of the broken window and flexed, testing the frame. Then came a roar so loud it split the night. Darren fired a shot through the window. The arm jerked back and vanished. Everything went silent again, except for distant, crashing footsteps retreating into the trees. The family didn't sleep. At dawn, they packed everything in minutes. Darren left the cabin door swinging open. As they fled down the dirt road in their truck, Mia glanced in the rearview mirror. Something stood at the edge of the trees, watching them. 8 feet tall, broad shoulders, no visible face, just dark fur and arms longer than a man's. They drove straight to the nearest ranger station. Officials listened, but their faces changed when Darren mentioned the knocking and the growl. When he showed them the photos of the damage, splintered frames, deep gouges in the door, a 15-foot smear of blood on the siding, they grew quiet. The official report filed 2 days later called it a bear attack. They said the bear was likely disturbed by human presence during early spring emergence. They said it probably stood on its hind legs and tested the cabin's exterior, looking for food. But no bear on record ever knocked. No bear ever punched through a window and roared like that. And no bear walked away on 2 legs. The family returned a week later, escorted by rangers, to collect their remaining belongings. The sight was worse than they remembered. The roof had partially caved in. One of the exterior walls bore a long, vertical scrape, 9 feet high, 4 deep lines that looked like fingers. Blood, now dried, stained the porch. It wasn't from any of them. They never found tracks. Not officially, but Tyler saw them, briefly, on a patch of soft earth behind the cabin. He pointed them out to the ranger, who quickly raked over them and said it was just wind damage. Tyler didn't argue, but he remembered. The Colliers sold the cabin 3 months later. The new owner tried to rebuild, but abandoned the project after claiming someone, or something, was throwing rocks at the cabin site every night. Locals avoid the area. Old-timers say they've known for decades that the woods there are off. Some stories go back to the 1970s. Others say the government knows and keeps it quiet. The Colliers don't talk about it publicly anymore. Darren keeps the broken window frame in his garage. Mia still wakes up some nights sweating. Lily sleeps with her light on. Tyler refuses to camp ever again. He still remembers the hand reaching in. Whatever visited their cabin that night didn't come for food. It came to test them, to see if they would run, and when they didn't, it nearly tore the cabin apart trying to get in. It was no bear. That much they all agree on. The hunting trip was meant to be a reunion. 4 men, all former Army buddies, gathered deep in the San Juan Mountains of Colorado. They set up camp miles from the nearest trailhead in a remote valley known for elk, black bears, and quiet. It was late October, cold and crisp. The group brought rifles, tents, and plenty of stories. No one expected the weekend to end in death. Only 3 men made it out alive. The 4th, Michael Mick Travers, was found the next day, broken, shredded, and left in a way no predator would leave a kill. The official word was a mountain lion, but the others knew better. They saw the thing, and whatever it wasn't a cat. They arrived Friday morning. Mick, 45, had organized the trip. He was a solid man, broad, bearded, never spooked by anything. Joining him were James Lowe, 47, a Denver mechanic, Rick Simmons, 44, now a high school coach, and Luis Ortega, 46, a truck driver from New Mexico. They'd camped all over the West, hunted elk and deer for decades. This spot was new. Mick had found it through a local who warned it was off-limits to smart hunters. Mick laughed that off. They hiked in 7 miles with full packs and gear. The campsite was perfect. Flat ground, tall trees, and a cold stream nearby. They set up 2 tents, made a fire ring, and hung their food high. First night was uneventful. A few distant owl calls, wind in the trees, nothing strange. The second night, things changed. Around 1 a.m., James heard movement, not the rustling of small animals, heavy, steady crunches in the leaves. He assumed it was a bear, grabbed his rifle, and stepped out quietly. The moon was out, and the woods were still. Then he saw it. 20 yards out, just beyond the firelight, something stood upright behind a tree, broad shoulders, no neck, arms nearly down to its knees, covered in black hair that shimmered in the moonlight. James froze. The figure didn't move, it just watched. Then it stepped back into the trees and vanished without a sound. James said nothing the next morning. He didn't want to be the guy claiming Bigfoot stories, but the next night, they all saw it. At around midnight, something hit Rick's tent, a loud thump, like a thrown rock or fist, then a second impact, harder. The tent buckled inward. He scrambled out, rifle in hand, shouting for the others. They all came out, half-dressed and armed. The fire had burned low. Beyond it, 30 feet away, stood the creature, at least 8 feet tall, hair matted and thick. Its eyes reflected the firelight, glowing amber. No sound, just breathing, deep and slow. Then it let out a low growl. Not a roar, not a scream, a deliberate sound, like a warning. Mick raised his rifle. The thing disappeared into the brush before he could aim. They stayed up until dawn. None of them spoke much. In the morning, Mick insisted on staying to hunt, saying it might have been a prank or a bear on its hind legs. James and Rick argued to leave. Luis was on the fence. Mick stayed. The others stayed with him. None of them wanted to split up. That afternoon, they spread out to hunt. Mick went north, deeper into the timber. He was supposed to check in every hour on their radios. At 3:30 p.m., he did. At 4:30, he didn't. By 5 o'clock, the sun had dipped behind the ridges. Luis and Rick went looking. They found his trail, then signs of a struggle, broken branches, deep scuff marks, then they found blood. A lot of it. They followed it 100 yards before the tracks ended. No drag marks, no prints, just silence and trees. They returned to camp and radioed for help using a long-range emergency set. But night came fast, and the thing came with it. At 11 p.m., it attacked. The creature charged from the trees, striking James first. It knocked him back 10 feet, snapping his collarbone. Luis opened fire, hitting it once in the chest. It stumbled, growled, and vanished into the trees. They grabbed James and ran. No gear, no rifles, just the clothes they wore and a headlamp. They reached a ranger cabin by morning. Authorities launched a search and found Mick the next day. He was hanging in a tree, 20 feet up. His body was torn apart, arms broken, chest caved in, jaw dislocated. One leg was missing. He'd been stripped of all gear. His radio was smashed. No animal signs nearby, no bear prints, no claw marks. The autopsy listed the cause of death as trauma consistent with a large predator attack. The official report blamed a mountain lion, citing aggressive post-hibernation behavior. But mountain lions don't break bones like that. They don't carry bodies into trees. They don't rip tents apart or stalk men over 2 nights. Photos of Mick's wounds were never released. The area was closed to the public 2 days later. The excuse: unstable terrain due to recent rain. Locals weren't convinced. One ranger, off the record, told a local paper it was worse than they're saying. James, Rick, and Luis gave statements, but they were told not to speculate. They weren't believed anyway. Some say the Park Service buried the truth. Others claim the government is aware of something in the forests and wants it kept quiet. None of the men ever returned to the woods. Luis sold all his gear. Rick moved to Florida. James still goes to therapy for nightmares. They don't talk about it publicly anymore. But each one of them swore that what they saw wasn't a bear. It walked like a man, moved like a predator, and it wanted them gone. The elementary school in Oak Ridge, Oregon, sat right at the edge of the forest. It was a small town with one main road, a grocery store, and a quiet community that didn't usually make the news. But on the morning of February 6, 2025, something happened behind the school that changed everything. Children screamed, staff ran, and though no one was hurt, what they saw haunted everyone who witnessed it. It was just after recess began at 10:15 a.m. The sun had come out after a week of rain. 20 children were on the playground, spread across the swings, slides, and climbing structure. Miss Harper, a 28-year-old teacher's aide, stood at the edge of the blacktop, sipping coffee while watching the kids. Nothing seemed unusual at first. Then a flock of birds shot out of the trees behind the playground, fast and in all directions. The noise was sudden and sharp. Some of the children looked up. One girl, Brielle, froze. She pointed at the tree line. Miss Harper turned and dropped her cup. Something massive was standing between the trees. It wasn't a man. It wasn't a bear. It was too tall, too still, covered in dark brown hair, shoulders wider than any man she'd ever seen, arms nearly down to its knees. Its face was partially hidden in shadow, but two eyes reflected sunlight. It stood silent, unmoving, watching the playground. Then it stepped forward. The movement was slow but confident. Its footfalls made no sound on the wet leaves. It didn't lurch or hunch. It walked upright like a person, but heavier, more deliberate. It crossed from one tree to another, then disappeared behind the trunk. Children began to scream. One teacher ran outside. Another pulled kids back toward the building. Miss Harper stood frozen until one of the students grabbed her hand, crying. She finally moved, ushering everyone inside. Someone pulled the fire alarm. Chaos followed. Within minutes, police arrived. Officers walked the perimeter, entered the woods with rifles, and returned empty-handed. They said they found broken branches, disturbed brush, and a strange smell like wet dog and musk. No tracks were found, despite the muddy ground. No predator, no intruder, nothing. The school was shut down for the rest of the day. Parents were called. Some refused to let their kids return. Brielle, who was only 7, wouldn't speak for 2 days. Her drawing of what she saw showed a tall, ape-like creature standing by a tree, eyes glowing. She said it never blinked. Miss Harper gave a statement. She said it wasn't a bear. It wasn't any animal she knew. The way it stood, the way it moved, it was intelligent, observing. She said she felt like it was studying them. That part was never confirmed. The official report stated the sighting was most likely a black bear disturbed by recent construction behind the school grounds. The county had cleared a patch of trees a mile east to build new housing, and authorities said the animal may have wandered closer to town than usual. But no bear walks upright like that. No bear watches silently from trees and vanishes without a trace. And no bear would make children describe hands with fingers too long and a face half like a person, half like a gorilla. Several teachers began speaking quietly to one another. One janitor said he'd seen something tall in the woods weeks before, but brushed it off. Another teacher said her dog refused to walk past the forest's edge on morning walks. Strange howls had been reported the previous month, but were dismissed as coyotes. 1 week after the incident, a man from the county showed up with a clipboard. He interviewed teachers, students, and staff, then he left. The principal said the man worked for the wildlife office, but no one had seen him before, and no badge was ever shown. After that, everything went quiet. The school resumed classes. New lights were installed on the back perimeter. Cameras were updated. Children were kept indoors during bad weather. Parents talked about transferring. Rumors spread. A month later, a group of local hunters found an elk carcass half a mile from the school. It had been torn apart. Its ribs snapped, spine twisted unnaturally, its body wedged between 2 trees, as if tossed there. No signs of bullet wounds, no signs of feeding, just brute force. The find was reported, but officials claimed it was likely scavenged by multiple predators. But locals weren't convinced. They'd heard stories for years of things in the woods, shapes moving just out of sight, screams that weren't animal or human. Most wrote it off until the thing showed up behind the school. Some say it was curious, some say it was warning them. Others believe it had been watching for a long time and finally let itself be seen. The children who saw it haven't forgotten. Neither has Miss Harper. She moved out of town a month later. She said she couldn't sleep knowing it was still out there. Not until someone told the truth. Whatever stood at the edge of those woods that day didn't run. It didn't hide. It came close. Close enough to be seen. Close enough to terrify 20 kids into silence. And then it disappeared like a ghost, leaving nothing behind but broken branches and a deep, cold fear that still lingers over that playground. Ben Ward and Travis Keller had known each other since they were 12. Both raised in the thick, pine-covered reaches of northern Idaho, where weekends meant hiking, hunting, or disappearing into the kind of woods that swallowed sound and didn't give it back. At 23, they were still doing what they loved, fishing the back creeks, camping in forgotten hollows, testing themselves against nature's indifference. But their last trip together would prove that the forest didn't just hold animals in silence, but something else entirely. Something that watched from the shadows and took without warning. On March 18th, 2025, they packed light and left early in the morning, heading out toward the Mallard Larkins Pioneer area, a place they both knew from old scouting trips, a remote backcountry with deep valleys, dense forests, and steep ridges. Travis was the better shot, always had been, calm and precise with his bolt-action rifle, while Ben had the tracking skills, able to read sign in dirt like lines in a book. They planned to stay 3 nights, plenty of time to track some elk or maybe even spot a cougar if they were lucky, but only one of them would ever leave. The first day went smoothly. The hike in was rougher than they remembered, snow melt turning parts of the trail into thick sludge, but they made camp by late afternoon on a flat knoll above the valley floor. They pitched a small dome tent, made a fire, and cooked up some jerky and beans while the wind howled lightly through the trees, bringing with it the faint scent of wet pine and cold stone. Nothing seemed out of place, but something was already watching them. The second night was when things started to shift. Around midnight, Ben woke to a strange sound, a slow, deep breathing, heavy and wet, not far from the tent, too rhythmic to be wind and too purposeful to be random. He whispered Travis's name, and they both sat still, hearts pounding, ears straining. Whatever it was circled once, then moved off into the trees without snapping a single branch, its retreat oddly silent for something that heavy. In the morning, Ben found disturbed leaves around the camp, wide impressions in the moss that didn't quite make sense, as if something had been standing there for a long time, just out of sight, without leaving the kind of prints you'd expect from any normal creature. They spent most of the day scouting the southern ridge, trying to shake off the weirdness from the night before, until just before sunset, when Travis stopped short and pointed across a clearing. There, half obscured by the trees, stood a figure, broad, tall, unmoving. Ben only caught a glimpse before it stepped back into the brush, but Travis swore it had been watching them, said it wasn't a bear or a person, and the way it moved wasn't like any animal he'd ever seen. That was when he first said he wanted to leave. Ben, trying to stay rational, said they should wait one more night. That was a mistake. At 2:11 a.m., the attack came without warning. Something struck the side of the tent with enough force to collapse one wall completely, snapping the pole and sending both men scrambling for their rifles and boots. Travis unzipped the flap, and that's when he saw it clearly for the first time. Standing less than 20 feet away in the pale light of their fire's last embers, a towering figure cloaked in dark, matted hair, shoulders so wide they nearly blocked the gap between the trees, eyes burning with a dull red reflection that seemed too intelligent, too focused. Its face was wide and flat, its nose pushed in like an ape's, but its brow and mouth carried something almost human, twisted, angry, and full of hate. Before either of them could fire, it charged. Ben squeezed the trigger and fired once, the shot echoing through the trees like a thunderclap, but the creature barely flinched. It let out a roar, not an animal's growl or scream, but a low, vibrating howl that shook through Ben's bones, and made his stomach turn to ice, and then it lunged, tearing through the tent like paper. As Travis bolted into the darkness, yelling for Ben to run, Ben followed, heart hammering so loud he couldn't hear anything else, crashing through the brush in near panic until, 100 yards downhill, Travis's voice suddenly cut off with a sharp cry, followed by the sound of snapping branches and something heavy falling. Ben stopped, turned, and shouted, but the forest was silent again. No movement, no reply. He searched for over an hour, circling, calling out, until he found Travis's pack shredded near the edge of a ravine. Nearby lay his rifle, barrel bent in half, as if twisted by something impossibly strong. There was blood, streaks of it up a tree trunk and splattered in a wide arc on the ground. But no drag marks, no tracks, no sign of a body. It was as if Travis had been snatched upward and vanished. Terrified and shaking, Ben made the decision to leave before it came back. He ran for miles through the dark, stumbling, tripping, until he reached the old logging road and finally triggered the emergency GPS on his radio. A search party was launched the next morning. They found what Ben had described: torn gear, blood, signs of a struggle, but no predator, no remains, no clear trail to follow. A few searchers noted massive branches broken high up in the trees, at heights no man or bear could reach, and others said they smelled something foul and musky, almost like a mix of wet fur and rot. Still, the official report cited a likely mountain lion encounter and closed the case when the search was called off 9 days later. Ben's story was never officially challenged, but no one believed him, not really. He said the thing that took Travis walked like a man, but moved with the speed of something far beyond human. He said its eyes held no fear, no confusion, just the cold calculation of a predator that knew exactly what it was doing. Some said he was in shock, traumatized. Others accused him of leaving his friend behind. But Ben stuck to the story, even as it ruined him. He hasn't been in the woods since. He sold his rifles. He moved in with his sister, barely speaks to anyone now. But if you ask him what he saw, he'll say the same thing every time. Something is out there, something no one is willing to admit exists. It doesn't leave tracks like a normal animal. It doesn't kill to eat, it kills to remove. Whatever took Travis didn't make a mistake. It wanted him.